Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another video on History by Podcast. Today I'm joined by Professor Kipp Davis, and we're going to have a nice chat about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I actually want to ask him about at least to start us off, I want to ask him about the forgeries.
And before we continue, be sure to subscribe to Kipp Davis's YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed to it already. It is tagged in the description below. Thank you.
So Kipp, there have been forged Dead Sea Scrolls that have been found out, sometimes immediately, sometimes too late. And can you tell us how does a scholar like yourself go through these scrolls and try to detect when something is a forgery and when it is not? How does that work?
Well, I mean, I think at first, as soon as, like when you posed this question at first and said sometimes immediately, sometimes not for some time, there's probably some context needs to be provided here. Sure. When the scrolls were first discovered in the 1940s, Roland Deveau, he was the archaeologist who was basically leading the project. And in the second volume of the Discoveries in the Judean Desert series, he actually published excerpts from his personal journals. And in there, he speaks of the Bedouin whom they were receiving material from trying to sell him what he noted were obvious forgeries right away. He could tell in his descriptions of them. He said they were just collections of Hebrew letters scribbled on an old piece of parchment that they had found lying in the dirt somewhere. And it was obvious to him at the outset that this was somebody who was trying to mimic the material without having any idea what he was doing. The kinds of forgeries that Deveau was encountering back in the 40s and the 50s. So and up after that, there's just nothing at all ever reported about potential forgeries among these manuscripts of the Judean Desert. That's the way things go all the way up into the late 90s, early 2000s. So that's not until well after the 1990s or into the 2000s are people raising these questions again. Over that time, what basically happens is all the scrolls were discovered in this window, right, between 1947 and 1953, and then there's basically nothing. Scholars are working on editing the material and very, very slowly getting it published. But I think in the meantime, these narratives, these ideas about the authenticity of the scrolls start to develop and sort of calcify to the point where by the time I got into the field fairly seriously, it was basically suggested that anything that we see just simply can't be forgeries. The way this works is that 95% or more of all the original discoveries passed through the hands of this Bethlehem antiquities dealer named Kando. Iskander Shahin. Everyone calls him Kando. And he held back a handful of items. And after he passed away, his son started introducing new material into the market. And I believe scholars rather uncritically accepted these things on the basis that, well, if it came through Kando, because we know all the other manuscripts are authentic, then there's obviously no problem here. So it's actually astonishing how slow most scholars were to pick up on what I see, what everyone tends to agree now are some really problematic features on a series of fragments that were introduced into the private market between 1996 and roughly 2000, 14. So you asked about some of the features of these manuscripts and how we identify forgeries. Well, in the first place, physically speaking, when you look at the actual material itself, very much unlike the collection of documents that came out of Qumran or Mudabat or Nachal Hever, the surfaces, the surfaces of these skins, they're mostly parchments, are extremely poor. And as a result of the fact that the surfaces are extremely poor, you can tell that they have been written on, that the actual application of ink to make text, that this happened well after the fact of their deterioration, after they've already been very old. Because as leather ages and as it undergoes destruction through changes in humidity or whatever, the chemical composition changes, it'll shrink and shrivel. Cracks will develop in the surface, and at not even at a microscopic level, but at a very at a magnified level, you can actually see places where ink is creeping into crevices in the leather that have developed over time. So I mean, that's sort of the first and the obvious feature, but there's other things too. If you imagine fragments, they're tiny little pieces of manuscripts that that's all that's left after sitting in these caves for 2,000 years. So they've broken apart into these smaller pieces. Everything's disconnected. But when you're looking at text on a fragment that might only be this big, you can see multiple lines of text. All the lines are almost always nice and straight, unless the fragment itself has undergone some warping, which will cause the lines to shift a little bit. And but that's something that you can obviously detect. What we were seeing on numerous of these forged fragments is that you'd have one or two, and they're very small. You'd have one or maybe two lines that are straight and aligned with each other in the center of the fragment, but then what's left on the top or the bottom of the fragment, instead of the remnants of the text following in line with what's above or below it, it starts to creep into and follow the contours of the edges of the fragment, right? I know, it's funny. Dennis McDonald is laughing because this is funny. And once you see it, it becomes obvious what you're looking at. There's when you spend enough time looking at manuscripts and studying the interactions of a stylus or a pen on the surface of the material, when you think through scribal practices and you work through the ways in which scribes are forming their letters, there are things too that you see on the edges. It becomes obvious that where somebody is trying to mimic a partial letter, it's just this one, all that's remaining is this broken piece of a hay, or the top bit of a sheen. The ink is blotting in such a way that it's obvious it's not formed by a stroke, but somebody is, I don't know how better to explain it, but somebody's trying to mimic partial letters. They're very small, so they're doing this on a pretty small scale on an already very badly damaged piece of leather. And I'll say one more thing about this. One of the things that we did discover, and something that I think this is my theory. There's a couple of physicists who've looked at the material and share this idea with me. Many of the forgeries that ended up on the private antiquities market, many of the forgeries, I don't even think they're parchments. Parchments are specially prepared skins. They're scraped and stretched to the point that they're quite thin, like compared to the leather was used. Animal skins were used for all sorts of things in early Judaism, from clothing to shoes to wineskins to what have you, right? But when you're making parchment specifically for the purpose of writing, it's stretched very thin. It's a more laborious, time-consuming process to prepare the way in which they dehair the skin and make it pliable for writing. It requires quite a noxious, I would say maybe a noxious cocktail of chemicals for this to occur. But what I think we have are thicker, less, not as well prepared skins. Obviously not skins prepared for writing, but probably for shoes or for bags or wineskins or what have you. And these are genuine antiques. Like, these are artifacts that date back probably to the 1st century BC, 1st century CE, but somebody has found them and they look close enough to a scroll fragment. So why not use that and turn it into a scroll fragment? So, sorry, I rambled on for.
Oh no, it's fine. But I get what you're saying. Like, you can tell when someone is doing a poor job trying to imitate writing in Hebrew.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the things too. I think when I started working on the fragments that are in private collections where all of the forgeries are, these are spread between a series of collections. The largest being Martin Skøyen's collection. Skøyen is a wealthy collector in Norway. Fragments were purchased by Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, Susan Pacific University, the Museum of the Bible, famously, right? I was working on fragments in both the Skøyen collection and the Museum of the Bible. And one of the things that we started seeing in Skøyen's fragments were an inconsistency in terms of the handwriting. Scholars date and identify texts largely on the basis of handwriting. It's called paleography. It's analyzing handwriting styles in antiquity, which certainly in formal hands, in the square script, tended to be a little bit more stable by virtue of the fact that prior to printing, there was something of a, I don't know, there was an institution or various institutions of scribalism where they taught you, this is how you form your letters, and then you repeat this mechanically until you get it right. So because of that, there's a relative form of standardization. Scholars are able to look at these script styles and see a pattern or an evolution over time. It's not perfect, right? But it's functional. It's a functional way of getting a good sense of how old a text might be. One of the problems that we were observing, particularly in the Skøyen fragments when we first started looking at them, our paleographer would find within an individual fragment unexpected inconsistencies in the scribal hand, where this letter sort of looks like it belongs to, the mid-Hasmonean period, but then right next to it is the formation of a final mem, say, that looks more particularly later Herodian. Not impossible, right, but odd. Very strange. It was extremely difficult to even attempt to, it sounds funny now in retrospect, now that we know what these things are. Of course, it was incredibly difficult and frustrating to try and actually date these fragments, because they were exhibiting features that didn't really conform to any, any particular style, any particular writing form that we were accustomed to. Our paleographer Michael Lungwall developed a term that he used to apply to these sorts of fragments, and I can't remember what it is offhand now. So, but it's astonishing when you actually look through his fairly large, detailed chapter on the paleography of the Scoian fragments. How many of these just fall into this category of, we're not entirely sure what this is because it's too difficult to even provide an assessment to it.
Has anyone ever been caught or fingered as being the forger or forgers of any of these documents?
There are lots of people who have raised. Names have been thrown out there. I'll just say, to date, nobody has been publicly outed or clearly identified as the forger or the forgers. And I hope you can understand that there are certainly names of well-known people out there, I won't be repeating those just because it's still an extremely sensitive issue. But I will say that there are known antiquities dealers from Israel. There are well-known, highly respected scholars in the field, of whom most people who work on this material are suspicious. It's, for a long time, my mentor, one of the people that I worked pretty closely with on the Dead Sea Scroll, on these forgeries, used to tell me, it's impossible that one person certainly could have forged all these fragments, because they would have had to have been an expert in, chemistry and scribal practices, and then early Jewish scribal culture and theology and scripture, all these things, right? I think in retrospect that perspective has turned out to be a little bit naive. The forgeries, when you get right down to it, are not all that spectacular. I would say now that we have a stronger sense of what we're looking at and clearer eyes, the problems with them are obvious on the face of it. And I think too, Christopher Rolston wrote an article in I think 2005 where he discussed this issue, and one of the things he said in it was that scholars need to catch up. The forgers are 1 or 2 steps ahead every time. They know what we know. They understand the field. They are continually developing their craft to try to get around authentication. And so far, they continue to find success. But I won't get into names.
Sure. I now want to ask about the circumstances that led to the Dead Sea Scrolls becoming available to the public.
Oh yeah, sure.
Can you tell us how that happened?
Sure.
Happened?
Well, it's something that didn't happen quickly enough. As I noted, the scrolls were all discovered between 1947 and 1953, and it was an enormous find just in terms of the amount of material that specialists in Hebrew Bible and early Judaism rather suddenly had to work on, especially compared to what preceded it. Prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was just a tiny handful of very, early Jewish texts. There was the Nash Papyrus, right? There was a handful of Hebrew fragments sitting in the University of Manchester at the John Rylands Library. There was a smattering of things at Oxford or in the National Library in Paris. But other than this, there was virtually nothing. And then all of a sudden, there's hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts. So early on, there was a motivation to put together a team and to start sorting through this material in earnest. The project was overseen by the Dominican French School of Archaeology, the École Biblique, in East Jerusalem. The composition of the editorial team was predominantly Roman Catholic. There were a handful of Protestant scholars from the United States and Germany in particular, and France. John Marco Allegro joined the team from England at the time as I think an agnostic sort of lapsed Methodist, but very shortly in that time started to rather vocally identify himself as an atheist. So just on the basis of the composition of the people who were charged with handling the material, there was the circumstances under which suspicion about what they had and how they would handle it started to grow. Circumstances surrounding the publication of the material became really contentious internally, mostly because of funding. The team was always looking for money and looking for ways to continue to fund their research to get the finds out to the public. And there were disagreements about what they should be doing. On the one side, you had some in the international team who wanted the publication to be definitive. So on the one side, you had members of the editorial team who wanted the publication to be definitive. They wanted this to be an exhaustive appraisal of everything in the collection, and that was, of course, as you can understand, that kind of research takes considerable time. On the other side, you had scholars who were really pushing to just get the stuff available, publicly available to the rest of the scholarly community, so that on a broader basis, as a larger collective, scholars could investigate the material more collaboratively and start answering some of these questions about what the texts are and where they come from. So, but this really caused a stall in the publication process. You'll notice the first volume of the Discoveries in the Judean Desert, published by Oxford, which is the official series of the Dead Sea Scrolls, appeared in 1953, followed fairly shortly thereafter in 1955 by publications of the fragments from Bowen, and then the so-called Small Caves volume, which is all the bits and pieces that came from some of the more minor caves. I say minor caves because they had considerably fewer manuscripts in them. These were not the mother lode that you found in Cave 4 or even in Cave 11. So, but these all appeared in the 1950s, and then it wasn't until 1967 with the publication of Allegro's volume 5, which contained the first of the Cave 4 materials, and then again nothing until closer to the 1980s It was long, drawn out. It was slow. The members of the team were they became I guess more publicly what's the word I'm looking for, guarded about the stuff that they had in hand. The scholarly community was becoming increasingly more impatient. Why is this taking so long? Why is it, 20, 30, 40 years later, and we still have, no access to this very important material from within the Dead Sea Scrolls? So this is sort of the climate of what was taking place leading up to the end of the 1980s and the early 1990s. So one of the things that the editors of the Dead Sea Scrolls did was, as they investigated and started to transcribe the contents of what was in the Scrolls collection, they also built a comprehensive concordance, a Hebrew Aramaic concordance of everything in the texts. They wrote them out on these recipe cards and collected them in and it was much like a Strong's concordance, where every single word was also collected in context. They made a series of copies of the actual concordance and deposited these in some important research libraries in Europe and the United States. There was copies at I believe at the University of Göttingen. I think they had a copy, and there was a copy in Leiden in the Netherlands. There were copies at Princeton. There was a copy at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. One of my mentors and friends, Martin G. Abeg, was currently doing his PhD research at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati under Ben-Zion Wacholder. He had actually just transferred over from the Hebrew University, where he started his PhD, working with Emmanuel Tove, and while there got to see some of this, unpublished Scrolls material, and then it kind of put a bug in his ear, and he was working as well on the War Scroll from Qumran for his dissertation. So while in Cincinnati, he got to thinking, well, maybe he knew that there was this concordance on recipe cards out there. He's like, maybe we've got one in our library, and sure enough, they did. So he checked it out. He went back home, and he rather painstakingly started to just kind of go through and to do his own reconstruction on the basis of what appeared in these concordances. He showed this to his supervisor. He managed to reconstruct entire fragments of some of these Cave 4 materials, and his supervisor got really excited and said, "We need to start doing this in earnest, and we need to get this out to the public." So Marty's dissertation project rather quickly got sidetracked, and he ended up spending the bulk of his time working on a Macintosh computer and developing HyperCard programs in order to organize and to produce transcriptions of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is one thing that was happening right around the early 1990s. At the same time, over on the West Coast, here in California, at the Huntington Library, they had there were a handful of these libraries as well in Oxford, and the Huntington Library in California actually had complete sets of photographs that were taken, infrared photographs that were taken of the Dead Sea Scrolls over a series of decades. And the Huntington Library made the decision for the first time in the 1990s to make their collection available to the public. So this was a big deal. And, one thing led to another. The editorial team just, they could no longer, they could no longer continue to operate in the way that they had been in the face of some of these new developments. So it was fairly quickly expanded from, I think at the time there might have been 8 or 9 people on the editorial committee to finally there were over 100 scholars working on these manuscripts.
Why was it kept? Why did they keep it under their control for so long? And is it true that a lot of the scrolls were leaked when photographic copies were sent to the press? And who was responsible for that?
Yeah, that's I don't know if that's a question that I still have a satisfactory answer for. At least the why question, right? I think what happened, or scholars in general, they do become what's the word I'm looking for? They do become we do become defensive about our own research and our own ideas to an extent. So I do think that played a big part in it. And I don't know if those in the editorial team also started to. I mean, some of these men, all men, of course, started to also gain a sense of some entitlement, being the guy that everybody has to come to and kiss the ring in order to just get a look at some of this stuff. I don't think the climate was such that it really fueled this conspiratorial sort of thinking about a religious cabal that was trying to keep trying to keep this stuff back because it was so damaging for the church or for Christianity or that. I think that's nonsense. Like, I don't think that was ever the reason or even part of it. I think you can boil most of it down to academic jealousy and academic propriety, and some of I suppose on some toxic levels.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's going to lead right into the next question.
Sure.
Because I'm going to bring up Robert Eisenman. And Eisenman, people say, wasn't he the one that sent the copies to the press? And he worked with like a couple other people. Yeah. And like, scholars don't like to mention that. And then they'll say, because it's him, he must be telling the truth about James, the brother of Jesus. As he scrolls. I would like you to speak on that.
It's funny. It's funny you bring that up, Jacob, because SBL is kind of a wild and crazy place. And I left the Nordic reception last night at some ungodly hour and walked back to my hotel with this old man, this retired scholar, whom I had never met before or heard of before. And as we shuffled our way back to our hotel, all he wanted to talk about was what an awful experience it was being a graduate student of Robert Eisenman, and what a fucking asshole Robert Eisenman is. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on your, but this and then before we arrived at the hotel, we were walking through the parking garage, and he says to me, he goes, "Here," he says, "my car's just over here. I'll grab some beers for you, and you can take those back up to your hotel room." And he had, I don't know, he had like 6 cases of various. Wow. I had my choice of so I grabbed a Modelo and thanked him and said goodnight. I actually think the Modelo is still sitting on my bedside, but I don't know. Robert Eisenman was a character. He was not a pleasant character. He was also not skilled enough in his own training was not adequate in the Semitic languages and in the early Jewish materials. I don't think to really know what he was doing, but yeah, I think he was in the first place more of an iconoclast and a populist, and so his entire involvement, while I and many scholars were grateful to him for sort of producing one of these large cracks, right, in the shield to eventually release the material. While yes, that was good on the one hand, it was also very obviously agenda driven, and Eisenman was in the habit of promoting some poorly formed ideas about what the scrolls were, who they represented, where they came from. Ideas that were, even though a lot of these texts were being made widely available to the public, the scholars who had been looking at them for years knew right away, well, this is just not accurately representative of what's in the collection, in the material, more comprehensively.
So when did the teacher of righteousness, who Eisenman claims is actually James, when did he actually live? He didn't live in the 1st century CE.
No.
So when did he live?
So I mean, we don't know, but the best estimate is that he lived at some point between the late 3rd century and the mid to late 2nd century. So he, some of this stuff might have been as early, his founding of the community might have been as early as somewhere just prior to the Hasmonean revolt, but or at some point during or even shortly thereafter. I tend to take a later perspective on this. I think he's more securely dated to probably the late 2nd century BCE. Getting a clearer sense of who the teacher of righteousness was. He was, I do believe he was a priest. He was a ranking priest within the Jerusalem priestly establishment, who had a bad falling out with the inner circle. To the point that he felt the impetus to gather this group of devotees and followers. I'm not entirely sure at what point this movement coalesced with the larger, what Josephus identifies as the larger Essene movement, but I don't think it's just as simple as pointing and saying these were the Essenes. The Essenes, I think, were a larger movement of like-minded Jews across the land. There were Essenes in Jerusalem. There were Essenes up in the Galilee. There were Essenes, in Jaffa. This particular group that the teacher of righteousness managed to gather for himself, and I think we see this in some of the manuscripts, was more of a specialized sort of inner circle, who were doing something a little bit different.
So it's not just so what you're saying is you can't take a broad brush and just say, okay, all these Dead Sea Scroll people are Essenes.
Yeah, or maybe more appropriately, the way to look at them is, they're a really narrow segment of this larger group that we know as the Essenes. So yeah, they obviously fit the mold as it's been presented to us by Josephus or by Philo, but it's not as simple as just pointing and saying that everything that Josephus and Philo identify with the Essenes would hold for this group as well.
Would it be fair to mention that that what ties into what you're saying is that scholars like Lawrence Schiffman, who see Sadducee connections with the Qumran.
Yeah. See, and this is where it becomes a lot more complicated, right?
Yeah.
What is the relationship between this particular group, and let's call them the Qumran Yachad, which is Yachad seems to be a term that they maybe use for themselves. Although as I heard in an excellent paper from John Collins yesterday, we might be setting too high an attachment on this term as a nominative when we should probably be understanding it adverbially. The assembly or the assembly or the gathering. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Sorry. So the Yachad, the Qumran Yachad, this group seems to have some connection with the Essenes, but also on numerous points still identifies with an elite priestly establishment, much more closely aligned to the Saducites or the Sadducees, and this is where Professor Schiffman has spent the better part now of his career making strong arguments, very highly plausible arguments for this community having some strong connection and being part of this what was originally a Sadducean community. But then at the same time, there's elements within the text. You see a strong tension. There's strong tensions with this Jerusalem priestly establishment. Where the group starts to identify themselves against these elite temple serving Jews. But then on the other side, they're also setting themselves apart from the Pharisees. And so I think it's a more complex, it's a more nuanced picture. It's difficult to say that this is who the Essenes were, and I also think by that measure it should cause us to more carefully consider how tightly we're identifying some of these other groups, like the Pharisees, like the Sadducees. The lines between the philosophies or what are called the heresies, to draw from the original Greek by Josephus, the lines between the heresies within early Judaism are not, I don't think they're really well defined. There's tons of bleed over, and there's lots of stuff going on in the margins too. I mean, this is kind of a field, but as I'm thinking about it, there's one of the things that we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls is a strong. This is where our strongest manuscript evidence for the Samaritan Scribal project. This is where we see it. So they've got there's some connective tissue there between the people at Qumran and the Samaritans. It's very complicated.
So you mentioned that it's complicated to identify them with the Essenes.
Don't get me wrong. I do think that the strongest associations are with the Essenes, and I still continue to describe in broad strokes. This is a type of an Essene community, right?
Yeah, I was just looking this up real quick to make sure I got the right author. Yeah, Hippolytus mentions that there were 4 groups of Essenes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that can plug into what you're talking about?
I think so, right? Like, and I would say that, you know, those are probably 4 groups that he knew of, right? So, yeah, it's one of the things, a question that scholars continue to discuss with regards to the scrolls and their relationship to the site, Qumran. Like, let's be clear, the manuscripts were discovered first before they started excavating at the site. And it's through basic proximity that the original identifications of the manuscripts with the site happened. It seems like a natural conclusion to draw, just because a number of the caves are just so close. I mean, Cave 4 is literally like, you know, it's right there. It's 100 meters from the actual ruins of Qumran. But some of these caves, I mean, when you get out to Cave 3 or to Cave 11, those are pretty far away. I mean, they're still relatively close, but it's still, you know, 1.5 I think it's 1.5 kilometers to Cave 11. I'm probably going to get that wrong, but it's you know, it's a bit of a hike. So there was this connection made just by virtue of proximity, and then also by virtue of some of the common language and themes that seem to appear in manuscripts from Cave 4 that you also see in manuscripts from Cave 1 or from Cave 11, right? So we're making these connections, but we should hold these connections loosely. We shouldn't hold them so tightly, because I think it is a much more nuanced picture. I think some of the ideas that we identify as maybe even sectarian is stuff that was, you know, it was kind of out in the air. It was stuff that wasn't exclusive to what the Essenes were thinking. So, sorry, I'm getting back on track now, I promise. The site itself, this site at Qumran, what was it? What were these people doing? You know, some of the things that scholars have focused a lot of attention on is the elaborate system of cisterns and ritual bathing sites just within the community, like within the site itself. This seems to have been a group that had a special obsession for ritual purification, which fits well within a ton of the material that we find in the scrolls. The fact that it was a desert community out, you know, in the Judean desert, away from Jerusalem. Still, you know, Jericho's relatively close by, but it's a pretty small place at this point in time. This fits with larger perspectives that we see across the collection of scrolls about the importance of going into the wilderness in order to prepare for the arrival of God in the last days. But who this group was, as we noted, their Essenism, the Essenes themselves were not just this. They were not just Qumran. They were spread all over the place. So one of the discussions among scholars for a long time is this particular site. Were these kind of the higher ups within the larger Essene movement who were more serious, or the most serious about taking a lot of these ideas more literally and setting themselves apart? Was this, one of the questions raised is, was this a place of permanent residency, or was this a place that people would go to spend some time in order to, get in touch with a higher level of purification or spirituality and leave? Is this a good explanation for how a lot of the material, the actual manuscripts, got there? Because one of the things that scholars also tend to think is that while a number of the scrolls were actually produced there at Qumran, and this was probably part of their livelihood. They were a scribal school who made manuscripts and probably sold them to people who wanted or needed them in order to sustain themselves. They made pottery, not just for themselves, but probably as a form of revenue. But they didn't write everything. A lot of stuff came and ended up in the Qumran caves from outside. Were people bringing this stuff with them when they came to stay there? Were these, manuscripts that were being donated by the larger group? We don't know. There's lots of questions. But yeah, there's it's important to recognize that there were Essene groups that were all over the place. And they probably, some of them maybe looked very similar to this settlement at Qumran, but some of them might have looked quite different.
Did the Qumran people have different views on when the Messiah, when did they expect the Messiah to come from that of the Hebrew Bible, or was it embellishing the Messianic prophecies in the Hebrew Bible?
Well, I think it's kind of problematic in the first place. Is there a Messianic expectation in the Hebrew Bible, right? I mean, there are certain texts which provide their own Messianic expectation in varying degrees, right? I mean, the book of Daniel is a very, it's got this strong orientation to this cosmic, this rather dramatic cosmic Messianic arrival. But I think that's quite different than some of the things that we read as potentially Messianic in places like some parts of the book of Isaiah, or even in Zephaniah. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I think maybe it's fair to say that they did take a pretty, I guess that you could say they were very strongly apocalyptic, which probably set them apart from many other pockets, sects, heresies in early Judaism, and for that reason, their collection of scriptures, of what we identify as texts from the Hebrew Bible, I think it helps to explain the composition of what they were collecting. Their own particular flavor of messianism fed into the types of texts that they were reading and the ways in which they were reading them. It's interesting that one of the texts that they did particularly like, it seems, was the book of Daniel. I think the manuscript evidence for the book of Daniel at Qumran is rather fascinating, because we have a snapshot of the actual development of the book of Daniel from these various pieces in real time taking place right within this community itself. Is pretty fascinating. But this also led to the production, or maybe coincided with the production of all sorts of different types of literature. A lot of it in Aramaic, which itself is really fascinating. These Aramaic, strongly cosmically oriented sorts of texts fixated on this arrival of powerful divine figures who are going to, conquer evil in very tangible terms in the last days. But you've got other things in Hebrew too, like the text that I've worked on, and the Genesis Apocryphon, or sorry, the Jeremiah Apocryphon, but also things like Pseudo Ezekiel, or things like the Book of Jubilees, the Books of Enoch. They had a strong predilection for this type of literature.
And in my final question, was there Dead Sea Scrolls found at Masada, and is that perhaps evidence that some of the zealots were holding to Qumranian views during the Jewish Roman War?
So I mean, this is yes. So to answer your first question, yes, there were manuscripts that were discovered, first century manuscripts that were discovered at Masada. They were discovered in what's been called a geniza, as part of what has been identified as a synagogue. Now, I think it's important to point out that Masada was one of the first sites that was excavated after the 6-Day War, when Israel managed to annex a lot of this territory as part of the West Bank. The archaeologist in charge of the excavation at Masada was Yigal Yadin, who was also a very high-ranking military official and politician in the Israeli government. And from the start, Masada was promoted as a very, very important feature of this this Jewish nationalistic program. So we need to take all of that quite seriously in our evaluation of what scholars have said about it. So Yigal Yadin says that he excavated a building that he calls a synagogue. What it is, and it might be, we don't know, but it might be. Just to give a sense of what this is, Masada was a really impressive, elaborate palace built by Herod the Great as his winter palace, and it's perched, atop this. What do you call it? It's like an escarpment. It's like a land feature that juts out from the cliffs right on the southern shore of the Dead Sea there. To access it now, you either go, you hike up, hundreds of meters of this trail to snake your way to the top, or you take you take a gondola to get to the top. So Herod built this place, and in it is a building that looks like an assembly hall. It's an assembly hall that has been interpreted as a synagogue because in early Judaism, synagogues were assembly halls. Importantly, there's not a lot of, there's no mosaics as far as I'm aware in the actual building itself. I might be wrong about that, but I don't remember seeing anything like that. So there's no telltale features about what this was beyond its relationship to certain archaeological architectural features of other sites that we understand and identify as synagogues. So we need to be clear on that. Now, they found a cache of manuscripts that they found a room off of the assembly hall itself that was filled with some manuscripts. Manuscripts mostly of Hebrew Bible texts. A couple of other really interesting things. There's a copy of the Book of Ben Sira that was discovered there. There's also, very exciting, a copy of a very important set of manuscripts from Qumran called the Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice. So there's this interesting mix of manuscripts that were discovered there it's been called a Geniza, right? Because we know of Genizot, these repositories of manuscripts that fall out of use. They get too old, and you need to replace them. But they're, because of some sense of sacredness of them, you can't just destroy them. You have to retire them or bury them. Right. This is the Cairo Geniza. The Cairo Geniza is the most famous of these. But let's be clear here. Like, this is a late idea. If this is in fact a Geniza, it's an early form of such a place. But there's no. I mean, we're still kind of guessing here. I mean, it might have been a Geniza, but there's nothing on the face of it that says it had to have been. Now, you asked about the Zealots, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long to answer this question, but I'll get back to this. So the Zealots hold up at Herod's Winter Palace, and as sort of their headquarters to take their last stand. And the Roman army came, and they built this giant rampart of earth all the way up to the. It's incredible. It's remarkable. You can still see it today, right? This rampart just to get up there to get in and to kill all the zealots. But I don't know if we can say that any of the manuscripts of the texts that were discovered there, were these their manuscripts? Were they Herod's? Were they? I don't know. This all feeds into the question of, what was this place within Masada that was excavated, this assembly hall, and what relationship does any of this have to the people who were basically squatting there, right, for a period of time at the end of the Jewish War? I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you, but it's any of these connections made between these groups, they're just they're so tenuous. It's hard to say, but I will say the manuscripts that were discovered there are intensely interesting and important for broadening our understanding of early Judaism.
I'll have a link to Dr. Kipp Davis's YouTube channel in the description below and the pinned comment. And with that being said, thank you for joining me today, Kipp.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you in person.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's so nice to finally put some physical faces to some virtual personalities. It's great.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.